All right, so this is going to be kind of a whirlwind talk. This was the title that Ivan gave me, but I've retitled it myself, Blindspots and Superheroes. I'm going to talk about summarizing the things in my class. A lot of this, especially if you haven't heard it before, is pretty intimidating and potentially scary. I'm not trying to give this dark view of what's going on. I'm actually trying to focus on the things of value that we can still save. My objective is the year 2200 to have elephants, dolphins, hummingbirds, and the grandchildren of your grandchildren of some people in this room coexist. And so this is going to be kind of a very fast presentation. I have 206 slides. It's going to take about an hour. And don't worry about remembering everything. Just try to squint and see the general gist of it. So the three main points I'm going to make are that energy underpins everything. We humans are taking more than our share of the net primary productivity and energy. Our brains are still living in the savannah. We have Stone Age minds that are living in a modern culture. And then the synthesis view of how all this fits together. So usually I show a picture of an elephant that we focus on one aspect of the elephant, the trunk or the tusks or the ear, and we forget that it's an elephant in total. But I don't think that's the best analogy for our situation. The way that I'm going to talk about it today is a four-sided cage with a mouse in it. And the four sides are energy, human behavior, the environment, and then the synthesis of how everything fits together. If any one of those parts of the picture are missing, the mouse escapes. And so that's why I try to fit so much in my presentations, because we have to know the entire story, or at least glimpse it, to have a better insight on what we should do as individuals and as society. So here's my outline for today. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time outlining energy, environment, and behavior. Then I'm going to list about 15 central blind spots that our culture can't really see, some conclusions. I will have some suggestions on what we should do as society, and I've got quite a few suggestions on what you could do as individuals living during this time. Okay, first, energy underpins everything. So there are trophic pyramids in nature. Underpinning it all is the sun, and at each level of the trophic pyramid, there's an energy transfer up to higher levels of the pyramid. There's something in optimal foraging theory in nature that says that there's an energy investment and then there's an energy payoff to biological organisms, and those organisms that have a big surplus on how much they expended versus how much they get have advantages in mating, reproduction, bodily maintenance, etc. Now this happens not only with animals but with humans, and our ancestral past is one where hunter-gatherers that had a high income minus the expenses, the energy, the caloric expense of hunting had advantages. And over time, that morphed into around 10 or 12,000 years ago when we had the agricultural revolution, is we actually had more surplus available that some people didn't have to hunt or gather. Some people could do other things, and that started this moonshot of human population and consumption. For the first 190,000 years of our species, that wasn't really the story. And so you can see how this developed over time. A lot of human labor, human energy went into carrying all these very heavy blocks to build the Great Pyramids. That was available because they had an energy surplus where some people didn't have to work in agriculture. So then what happened? Around the mid-1700s, we started the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is a story of applying large amounts of fossil energy to processes that humans used to do manually. And these processes were very energy inefficient, but since energy was so unbelievably cheap, it increased the returns to each hour of human effort. Does anyone know what these are? Sorry? Diatoms, excellent. Diatoms are tiny, tiny, tiny sea creatures. And when they die, they go to the bottom of the ocean, and after hundreds of millions of years, they turn into fossil fuels. And this was the big story of the last couple of hundred years, which is very unknown to most people. So if you consider the average human worker on the planet, the average wage in 2014 was $57 per day. So how many man days of work could you get on the average daily wage of $57? Well, one, because one man working for a day would make $57. How many man days of work can you get for an American for $57? Well, the American salary is 5 times that. So we could get 1/5 of a day of work on average. That includes CEOs and things like that. Okay, but let's talk about our fossil coworkers. How many man days of work can you get for $57 with oil at $80 a barrel? You can get 6,000 workers, 6,000 days of human work for $57. When oil is $20, which is the historic trend average, you get almost 22,000 man days of work from 1 barrel of oil. This is the story underpinning the industrial age. So 1 barrel of oil does the same amount of work as 4 years of human working. And the average American uses 60 barrels of oil's worth of fossil fuels per year of coal, oil, and natural gas. So this is me. I'm 1/10 of a horse. Actually, right now, I'm probably like 1/8 of a horse. That's my horse, which is 1 horse. That's my utility vehicle, which is 45 horsepower, the equivalent of 45 horses. And that's my truck, 150 horsepower. This amount of diesel fuel in my truck will power that many thousand-pound vehicle in the snow, uphill, for miles. Imagine 4 people behind it, pushing it, how long that would take, how much you would have to pay them. So this is the story of industrialization. Is there a pointer on here? Okay, so think about milking a cow by hand. No external energy required. You make $5 an hour, or the wages or the profits of the milk farm or whatever. But then if you do these machines, you're adding 180 times external energy in the form of machinery, electricity, etc. And your wage goes from $5 to almost to $20 an hour. Or it's cheaper milk, or it's more profits for the people that own the milk factory. Or you can have these totally automated milk machines where a cow just walks in and it gets grabbed and milked and there's very little human input. But that's very energy intensive. It requires 400 times the energy of a manual human, but the profits are $25 an hour. So this trade is what underpins all of our industrial processes in the world. We're applying very cheap fossil energy to things that humans used to do. So every single good or service in our economies has one thing in common. We require an energy input first in order for it to be produced, all goods and services. So energy and growth, this GDP is gross domestic product, which is a measure of the size of our economies, is the red line. And it's extremely correlated, like 0.98, with energy, effective energy use, like electricity. It's very, very correlated. This is an index of the electricity reliability index per country, means how often there are blackouts and brownouts and stuff. And you can see countries that have a very low electricity reliability have very low GDP. It's only when you get 95% and above reliability did GDP go way up. So these fossil slaves don't complain, they don't breathe. Well, they do breathe, and we know that the CO2 they're emitting is being a problem now. But they contribute to higher wages, higher profits, lower price stuff in our economies. So the average American today consumes around 3,500 calories a day. Some of that's wasted. So we eat maybe 6 Big Macs in our bodies worth of calories. But if we consider the exosomatic footprint, the amount of energy that each of us on average uses that we don't eat, but it's part of the footprint of the lights and the car that drove me here and the airplanes and the built infrastructure, we consume the equivalent of over 400 Big Macs, each of us, every day. So, unbeknownst to most business schools and economists, 90% of the physical work in human economic systems today is done by fossil energy. Modern industry uses vast amounts of fossil carbon to do the things that humans used to do. So this graph is from a speech from the president of the bank, or the chief economist of the Bank of England. You've all seen population curves that look like this. This is not population. This is GDP, which is a proxy for wealth of physical stuff, per capita over the last 3,000 years. And you can see there's been a moonshot since we found fossil fuels. In fact, today's average human is 13 times wealthier than the average human 200 years ago. And today's Americans are 50 times wealthier than the average human on the planet 200 years ago in terms of energy and stuff. We are living during an amazingly special time. So this is the total world consumption of energy. You can see in the 1800s, this beige strip is biomass. Basically, we took forest fuel for heat and for fuel. Then we found coal, then oil, the green, natural gas is the red, nuclear, hydro, and renewables at the top. We keep growing our access to primary energy. So in the distant past, we had a very small total energy pyramid, and now we have this huge pyramid, but we only historically have spent 5% of our energy on finding and delivering energy. The other 95% of the energy we could allocate towards industry, towards military, education, hospitals, philanthropy, art, free time, et cetera. There's this huge pyramid of the things that are possible because of energy surplus. But the same thing happens in nature, in human economies. If this cheetah had to instead get a rabbit for the same amount of effort, or a mouse for the same amount of effort, it would have less benefits because its energy return metabolically would be lower. Same sort of thing in our situation. We found all the Beverly Hillbilly oil a long time ago. Then we had to drill under the ocean, and now we're going to this unconventional oil, tar sands, things that are more costly and more environmentally dirty. So you might think, if oil is so amazing in what it can do, well, who cares if it's $200 or $300? It's still a bargain, right? Well, yes, but our society is not built on $200 oil. It's built on $20 oil. This is the same graph rearranged that I showed you earlier. If there's an energy cost price increase from 5 cents to 10 cents to 15 cents a kilowatt hour, manual milking, you still make $5. You're not using any external energy. Semi-automated milking, you start to see a decline in your profits from 20 to 17 to 12 because there's an intermediate amount of energy that's needed. But what happens on the really energy intensive stuff is you go from a very high profit to a minimal profit, but if energy prices go from 10 to 15 cents, not only do you no longer have a profit, you have a big loss because you're adding so many units of energy to a process that you assumed the energy would be cheap, but now it's expensive. So we have lots of oil. We're not running out of oil. We're running out of cheap oil. This is actually an optimistic from the Energy Information Agency, or the International Energy Agency. This dark purple is crude oil from the currently producing fields. It's going to be cut in 2/3 by the year 2030. It's going to be made up by fields that are yet to be developed, yet to be found, things like tar sands, biofuels, ethanol, and a byproduct of natural gas. But all that other stuff that's not the purple is more costly. Oil, you have to find it first before you use it. These bars are how much oil we found in each year, and the black line is how much we used in each year. And we're now finding we're using 5 times more oil than we're finding, which is not a problem for next week, but it is a problem for the 2030 and 2040s. So, new technology or higher price. This is a total chart of US oil production for the last 17 years. This purple is the conventional light sweet crude oil, and this orange is the unconventional stuff like shale gas, fracking, and not gas, shale oil fracking. And this stuff was cheap, this stuff is quite expensive, and that's part of the story. For another story, based on what you've heard in the news, approximately 2/3 of all the world's oil reserves are in this shaded area. So this depletion of fossil resources also applies to mineral resources. This graph has nickel, lead, gold, copper, zinc, and the ore concentrations. And they've been declining over time. When we have a lot of energy, we can use more energy to get more overburden and get more of the ore out. But these two energy and ore grades are linked. So if energy is what underpins our economies, what about money? What is money? Well, money, based on what I just said, should give you a hint that money is actually a claim on energy. If I have a $20 bill in my pocket or $5,000 in my checking account, eventually I'm going to spend that on something. And whatever I spend it on is a call on energy, some amount of coal, oil, natural gas, and other resources. Now, there's a huge myth, which I did not learn in business school, but I've learned since. Banks do not loan money, they create it. They create it via loans. Since the last 40 years, there's not been a single country in the world that issues money and has something physical backing it. If you go into a bank in Rochester and get $1 million loan and they say that your credit is approved and the bank's in good standing, what happens is $1 million is put into your account and $1 million IOU is put into the bank's account. So their system balances, the world balances. But nowhere in the world did $1 million of purchasing power get removed. $1 million more purchasing power was added out of thin air. So imagine helicopters over the city of Rochester dropping billions of dollars. What would happen? Well, first of all, you all would leave my Earth Day talk in a lickety-split. And some of you would be millionaires if you had backpacks and you could stuff it in, and a lot of other people would get a few grand or whatever. The economy would boom. People would take trips. Some people would buy houses or cars. And what happened at the same time? Nothing happened with our shale oil or our technology or our resources, but the money made us access that resources faster. This is not too dissimilar than what's been happening in the real world. Debt, which is a whole 1-hour presentation on itself, has been ballooning. We've been offsetting our economic problems by printing credit and borrowing more from the future. So borrowing money, going into debt, doesn't have to be a bad thing. For the longest time in this country, we didn't have enough money. We had too much open space and lots of good entrepreneurial ideas. And so we needed more money to kind of grease the skids of the economy. But at some point, energy is our real wealth, and our really low entropy, good quality energy is declining, and we're creating more and more monetary claims to represent it. So since 1965, we've grown our debt more each year than we've grown our economy. Now, debt wouldn't have to be a bad thing if you grew your economy more than you grew your debt. But as we issue more and more debt just to keep things going, what we're doing really is we're transmuting wealth into income. And that's kind of a story of larger and larger helicopters over the nation and the world. Okay, this is Earth Day, so it's kind of like the one day of the year that I can come out of the closet and admit that I really care about this stuff. So I will, this is gonna be a little depressing, but you all are here on a beautiful day to kind of learn and hear about this stuff. So I'm sure you can handle it. So we are, without climate change and ocean acidification really even manifesting yet, are causing the 6th mass extinction. There's up to 200 species dying off every day. We're taking 40% of the net primary productivity. You've heard about all the pollution issues and pesticides and such. So this is a new story that they found that shrimp at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest place in the ocean, had 50 times the toxic chemicals than creatures that lived in polluted Chinese rivers. So if we think about terrestrial vertebrates, which is us, our livestock, and the 5,500 mammal species that live on land, these icons represent these 3 categories. So 12,000 years ago, there were no farm animals at all, and there were humans and wild animals. Wild animals 12,000 years ago were 300 million tons, estimate, 1,500 times bigger than humans. So it was 99.9% of the biomass of the world was wild animals. Now, 2015, that's changed. This is a representation of the size. Yeah, it's humans and our livestock are 98.5% of the total. So there's two central points here, and they're distinct but both important. Number one is wild animals are 1.3% of the total mass. So we're taking more than our share. And the second point, which is the real sledgehammer, is the total size of animal biomass 12,000 years ago was 300 million tons. It's 6 times that size now. Why is that? What? You're right, but meat consumption, population growth, but why is it even possible? Fossil fuels. We're taking current sunlight in the form of crops and water and soil, but we're also taking ancient productivity and adding it. All these diatoms that were sequestered over hundreds of millions of years, we're using that productivity as well. Okay, so I added this slide for today just because you're all in Minnesota. I just wanted to research it the other day. So there's 9 million pigs, average 220 pounds, 5.5 million humans, 2.3 million cows, 1 million deer, 800,000 raccoons, 12,000 bear, and 3,000 only moose. And I'm forgetting like goats and sheep and dogs and horses, and I'm also forgetting possums and mice and things like that. But this is the general, the big ones. So how does that 50-to-1 ratio apply to Minnesota? Well, we're actually slightly better. This is graphically Minnesota. Humans and our livestock outweigh the wild animal biomass in the state of Minnesota 43-to-1. We don't talk about that or think about it. We just assume that it's part normal. For the record, bacon and brats are 2 of my favorite foods, and 5 years ago I gave up pork. I eat beef still today if it was raised in a spa, and I still eat chickens, but pigs and beef, I don't do that anymore just because I was like, this doesn't fit. But as you can see, I'm not starving. Okay, so climate change, I'm sure you're all somewhat familiar with that. Geologic history, most mass extinctions were linked to CO2 pulses. Most of those were lava basalts, which is long time volcanic eruptions. We're emitting things much, much faster than volcanoes did. We're still small compared to volcanoes, but it's the speed of the emissions that's the risk. So these 3 things, deforestation, transportation, and power plants, are equivalent to the volcanoes of the past. So I'm not going to spend much time. I assume other speakers talked about climate change. This is CO2, this is global temperature, this is sea level. Around now, we should be going to a cooler period. We should be reverting, but we're shooting up instead. So the good news is that the concentration pathways that the climate scientists use, which show how much climate impact there will be from human forcings, are delusionally exaggerated because of their economic assumptions and their conflation of money and energy. That's the good news. There's no way that we have 7 times as many fossil fuels in the year 2100 as today. It's just non-economically viable. The bad news is that despite a slowing economy and despite some decarbonization of the energy supply, and despite coal being substituted with gas, 2015 and 16 were the highest annual increases of CO2 versus the previous year. So some of this is due to land use change and things that aren't fossil fuel related, but some of it's related to the climate, and the biosphere themselves are starting to be a contributor via positive feedback loops. Okay, moving on to human behavior. I was going to check my watch, but I'm just going to speak till I'm done, so you guys are kind of stuck. But I promise you won't be bored. So we're related to all life on Earth. We know we're related to everyone in the room here, like 99.9%. We're related to bonobos and chimps, like 98.5%. We're related to cats, 90%. Cows, 80%. Bananas, 50%. Fruit flies, we're related to everything alive. So humans, down in this little corner, we've got all these nieces and nephews and cousins in nature. So, what are we designed to do, or what would we gravitate towards? So I made this little diagram. Here's my dog and my cat and my other dog here, my golden retriever. So what are the instincts that dogs were selected for? Well, they were kind of co-evolved with wolves over the last 20,000 years. This was their ancestral environment, was a co-evolution with humans. And so to a dog, things that feel good and get them very excited and happy on this scale, frisbees and toys and hamburgers and bones and pleasing their masters, and most of all, playing with other dogs. Those are all very consistent with the ancestral environment of the selection of dogs. Climbing a tree, this is my cat, is not really one of the favorite things to do of dogs, although some of them would try it. So that doesn't shout too loudly. Well, what about humans? The evolutionary instinctometer. Well, we also like fatty and salty foods. We like novelty and unexpected reward, things dealing with sex, especially men, things dealing with status and technology, Facebook. What really shouts loudly is our tribal instincts, our gossiping and I can't believe she said that, and let's bond together with the 5 of us in this group, and social status and moving up the mating ladder, etc. What doesn't shout loudly to us, even though our brains can understand it, is energy depletion, climate change, biodiversity loss. That's why there's 30 of you in this room, and the rest of the people are working in their gardens or having beer. Thank you very much for coming, by the way, because I know that's a sacrifice. But our brains don't shout loudly for the things that really matter. So our brains are like analog computer with thousands of subroutines running at once, and the mechanisms we're not looking to, I want to pass my genes on to the next generation. We don't think that way. We think, I just do things that feel good. The things that feel good give us neurotransmitters, endocrine and hormone systems, and feelings. So we're not fitness maximizers, we're adaptation executors. We execute adaptations that were handed down from our ancestral past. So one common thing in biology is called supernormal stimuli, which biologists can target something that the animal really responds intensively to. If you put a fake popsicle stick in a bird's nest and paint it red, and the popsicle head is bigger than the other birds, the mama bird will disproportionately feed worms to this fake creature. Why? Because big and red was a signal in their ancestral past that you better feed this one because it's more likely to survive. But humans have the same thing. Facebook targets our supernormal stimuli. Amazing. Oh my God, I got 93 likes. People like me. And the dopamine and the feelings are exactly a supernormal stimuli. So what ends up happening is I added this slide at the very last minute because my stepdaughter and her boyfriend were going to come. And I wanted to tell her boyfriend this slide, but they had car trouble, so they're not here. But what ends up happening is as you get exposed to higher and higher stimuli, you get addicted. And then you can't feel normal at the lower levels. And this is endemic in our culture, even without climate change and resource depletion. You know, I make sure that my students don't have their phones on in the room, but you look around college campuses and it's, you know, as people are doing this. This is worldwide. People are sucked into this. Okay, so I'm going to briefly go through some of the 10,000 biases. We have an optimism bias where we think things will be better than they really are. We think we're better than we really are. 99% of high school seniors think they're better at getting along with others than the average person. So the real answer is 50%, et cetera. I know you're all laughing because I don't need to explain that. The consensus trance, we desperately care about social approval. 2 famous studies, the ASH study had 8 people around a table and 7 of them were Confederates. 1 person was the actual study. And if all 7 of the other people said B matched this line most closely, 2/3 of the time that 8th person would say, yeah, it's B. Because they didn't trust their own judgment or they didn't want to look weird to the others, but we are incredibly moved by other people's perceptions and opinions. Another example was they had smoke coming under a door. And if there 3 other people saw it and ignored it, the 4th person who was this test study was like, oh, I'm not worried about that, I won't say anything. We are very socially aware. Future blindness. This was a gas line. James Schlesinger, the Secretary of Energy and head of CIA, said about Americans, we have only two modes, complacency and panic. Johnny Carson joked that there was a toilet paper shortage in the 1970s, and he was kidding. And the next day, 90% of stores were totally sold out nationwide of toilet paper. Another example, I was talking to Ivan, how could we fill the room here? Well, they'd fill the room if there were gas shortages or if people didn't have air conditioning or something that would cause them to pay attention to right now. We all want to do things that improve the future. I'm going to diet, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to try to help the environment, I'm going to start tomorrow. And then when tomorrow comes, well, tomorrow is then one day further. Okay, so everyone in the room, imagine this picture. Imagine a black panther the size of a school bus with iridescent green dragonfly wings swooping down into a blue ocean bay grabbing a barracuda. None of you have ever heard that description before, but I bet all of you visualized something like that, and all of your visualizations were different. That's the power of human language, is we can create so many more examples of things, examples of word combinations than can physically exist. So all of you probably know that if we design a bridge made out of chickens from Wabasha over the Mississippi River, that it won't work. That's one of those things that we kind of intuitively know, that chickens are alive and they have feathers and they have their own volition. Building a bridge out of chickens is stupid. Yet a lot of the things that we do in our culture are the equivalent of building bridges out of chickens. So the mind can imagine millions of more ideas than work in the physical world. So the virtual world in our brains is much, much stronger than the physical world in how it speaks to us. So not only do the passions shout louder than the reason in our brains, but culturally now this is being completely hijacked as we have a race to the more primitive areas of the brain. If you think of, here's my presentation. It's mildly interesting and I'm keeping your attention. It's more interesting than an atmospheric science paper or a climate change summary chapter or the average science presentation, but it's going to lose out to an Al Gore movie clip or a TED Talk or church or a podcast or a Saturday Night Live video or Facebook or Game of Thrones or any of these things. And our culture via the media is heading in that direction where we get incredibly hijacked. So this, here's me last year's Earth Day talk. This is my 7th consecutive year doing an Earth Day talk. And clearly I'm not succeeding. So look at these two videos. This is Gangnam Style. 3 billion views, 6,000 views. So you can see how things that deal with science are less interesting to people. So another aspect of human behavior that I'll point out is that we have this constant dichotomy between competition and collaboration. And it's me versus us. I want to compete within my own group, except when I'm competing with another group. Then I really care about my group versus the other group. And so I'm going to come back to this later, but this is a very prevalent from our ancestral origins in small tribes. So there's something I refer to as the gene agenda. It doesn't really have an agenda, but it acts as if it did. And our minds can look forward, but our feelings come from what worked in the past. And the bottom line of this introduction to human behavior is our energy and environmental problems are very real, but are largely due to a mismatch of our evolved brain attributes versus our modern reality. And this mismatch prevents us from addressing the problems effectively or at all. Okay, an important side story, enter the superorganism. So there's something in biology called the maximum entropy production principle, which states that organisms and ecosystems self-organize so as to better access an energy gradient. So if you take a thermal heat scan of a forest, the redwood trees will be the coolest because they're degrading incoming sunlight. The forest road, which nothing is growing on, will be the hottest because it's reflecting the sunlight. So the ecosystem organized so these trees accessed more energy. Well, if you consider that humans are not only social, but we're what's referred to as ultra-social, which means We have many generations raising our young. We have division of labor. And very much like the bees, wasps, termites, ants, we're incredibly social, and we work with others to get surplus. Historically, it was actually physical surplus, like grain. Now it's surplus value. It's stocks and bonds and digits and money and electrons in the bank. So over history, we self-organized using infrastructure and technology and other things in order to increase this access to surplus. So think about the agenda of the gene. Would you rather be 10 degrees, 65, or 110? Well, I'd rather have air conditioning here and heat here. Would you rather be poor or rich? Do you want 0 children or greater than 0? Want newspaper, dial-up, DSL, or broadband? Would you prefer to be miserable or comfortable? Need to be in town in 2 hours, drive, car, or walk? Prefer to win wars or lose wars? Care more about how your life is in 2017 or 2027? Prefer to be viewed as more or less successful than one's neighbor? If you check off these marks, a lot of them have to do with using more energy. By the default of the human condition is we end up using energy. Some of them are due to cultural peer pressures. That guy's buying another boat for his summer vacation. I need to buy one too to keep up with him. But a lot of them are linked to energy. So collaboration with other humans will always end up using more energy than just individuals or smaller groups. So what ends up happening is we go back to this chart. Until the 1970s, we were expanding on a physical world. There was lots of cheap energy and resources, and we kind of ran in with the energy crisis in the 70s. We ran into limits. And what we ended up doing then is 2 things to keep the energy spigot going. We went to globalization in a big way, so we went to the least cost areas in the world to develop things, and we went to debt. Since 1971, no currency in the world has a physical tether. So globalization and debt until 2008, when we had a financial crisis, and then the central banks had to come in and take over things. So we keep finding ways to keep the energy spigot growing. 2 years ago, Italy announced they were including prostitution and cocaine sales in their GDP in order to keep the GDP to debt ratio under the European Union. So we do things in order to access more energy. So mathematically, if you look at global wealth, adjusted for inflation, wealth represented by the total currency in existence, and global energy use per time, power, there's a relationship. The ratio of power to wealth has not changed in 50 years. We are a superorganism. And there's 2 main implications of this, is large numbers of humans act the invisible hand in order to access more energy, and it's not thinking. It just sloughs forward, wanting more low entropy goodies as it goes forward in time. And the organizations, the corporations and the governments and the civic leaders and whatever kind of self-organize to contribute to this. And you end up with Cape Canaveral, Florida and other examples. The second is kind of subtle but also important. We naturally assume that the ability to grasp and envision and react to complex events increases as the size goes up, from a single human cell to a kidney to a person to a small group to Congress to a whole nation to the whole world. But this isn't true. The evolutionary sweet spot of able to understand complexity and respond to it is between an individual and a small group of people. As you increase the size of the people involved, they get dumber and dumber. The larger group, the dumber it gets, which is why all these things I'm talking about can only be understood in the mind of a single human. It can be understood in a lot of minds, but me telling you all this doesn't mean that you automatically understand it. So complexity, the ability to understand things, decreases the larger number of people you have. Okay, so with all that backdrop, now I'm moving on to some prevalent kind of blind spots in our culture. So a big one is people think society runs on money. Well, energy does all the work needed to combine other inputs and cannot be substituted other than with other types of energy. So $10 worth of gasoline is worth thousands of dollars worth of pencils or cupcakes or clickers or whatever else. So the truth is that money is the map, but energy is the territory. Society runs on energy. Blind spot number 2, economics is a science. This graph is taught in most Econ 101 freshman classes. It shows the relationship between firms and households in this circular model of consumption. Households demand it, they spend money, the firms produce it, and it's this circular model, still taught today. Well, the reality, which is what I teach in my class, is there's 3 core things missing from this picture. One is, where do we get all the stuff that the firms use? We get it from nature, and some of it is non-renewable. And what happens after we use it? Well, there's waste streams, there's CO2, there's pollution, there's garbage. And the third thing is why? The why. What we have to integrate human behavior to make sense of this whole thing. What do we use all this energy for? Okay, world GDP. Gross domestic product, extremely correlated with energy. So correlated by any reasonable first approximation, I'm going to rebrand it gross domestic burning. We basically, a measure of how much stuff we have is a measure of how much stuff we burned. So I can summarize macroeconomics as GDP. And I can summarize microeconomics in a world of incredible fossil fuel surplus. Utility, which is the big word in microeconomics, basically for most people means whatever. Whatever I want to do, that's utility. Clearly, there's no economists in the room. If so, I would be, well, but I'm happy to debate you if there are. Okay, so reality number 2, economic theory was invented during a special, non-repeatable time in human history, during this red circle. That's when economic theory was invented. Blind spot number 3, the American dream is based on hard work and cleverness. The American way of life is non-negotiable. There are no greater people than the American citizenry. As long as we believe in ourselves and our country, there's nothing we cannot accomplish. The truth is that this country has used more fossil slaves in the last 10 years, in the last 30 years, in the last 50 years, in the last 200 years. Since the dawn of time, America has used more coal, oil, and natural gas than any other country. And the American dream is a byproduct of geology and warfare. And most of us don't think about that. Yes, we are creative. Yes, we are clever. Yes, we do have empathy and kindness and a lot of other attributes. But this is the backdrop. Blind spot number 4, technology will offset resource depletion. Just very quickly, this is a graph showing that by the year 2030, the internet could possibly use 20% of total energy. Okay, so technology. Imagine that we invented a new air conditioner that cost $10. What a wonderful technological development. What would happen is a lot of people in Rochester would buy 2 or 3 for their house because it's so cheap. A lot of people that don't have air conditioners would now be able to afford one. And if you did have one, you would save so much money that you would go and spend it on some beer or a trip or whatever else. All these things are called Jevons paradox or rebound effect, which means that as long as GDP is what we maximize, improvements in efficiency and new technology inventions end up increasing the total energy use. So technology can be divided into 4 kinds. There's human labor replacement, like cars and chainsaws and things like that, that it's technology that humans used to do that now machines do for us. There's new things, new resource conversions like Facebook that we never had in our ancestral past, but are now available. Then there's the other 2, resource efficiency, like making a coal plant more efficient, wasting less energy. There's also new energy technology like solar panels or geothermal. But the vast majority of technology is in these first 2 categories. So the majority of cases, new technology is just a vector for more primary energy use in the economy. So this is point 1 about technology, but there's another point, is that our fossil productivity, our fossil magic in the last 30 or 40 years increasingly went towards more productivity than to wages. So this is, the blue line is the bottom 90% of Americans, and the red line is the top 10%. So we hired machines, those kind of semi-automated cow workers, and most of the wealth that came from the higher wages went to the top 10%. So if we continue in that route, the machines are going to displace human workers. So technology reality part 2, this is a chart. The green chart here is manufacturing employees in the United States over the last 80 years. This blue chart is bartenders and waitresses, which is as of last year, first time ever. We have more bartenders and waitresses in the United States than we have manufacturing employees. And this is government employees, near an all-time high there, though I expect that's going to drop. This is the black line here is the percent of people who are employed and want to be out of all these different countries. The black line is the United States. This black line and a few charts that I'm about to show later explain why it was either going to be Trump or Bernie Sanders that was going to win. Because most people, not the rich, but most people are hurting. So technology part 2, increasing substitution of human labor for mechanical under current trends will impoverish a higher number of humans. Blind spot number 5, there are no limits to growth. Well, the truth of this is there are limits to growth. We just don't like to hear about them. This was a famous quote by Julian Simon. We have in our hands now the technology to feed, clothe, and supply energy to an ever-growing population for the next 7 billion years. Well, in about 500 million years, the sun will be so hot it's going to boil the ocean. So he was a little bit off on that, but he was further off in many other ways. Famous study, some of you may have heard of it, Limits to Growth in 1972, predicted that pollution and resource scarcity would limit industrial production from 2010 to 2030 timeframe, which is industrial output right here, and food sometime thereafter. It was largely debunked and ignored at the time. But in fact, this is a 5-year moving average of all the largest countries in the world. Growth in the 1970s, 2000s, now growth has been declining. In fact, the lowest 4 quintiles of income in almost all developed countries have been hit by significantly declining income. This is the bottom 20% of Americans. From 2000 to today, they're making 88% of what they did after inflation. But it's not just, I got one more slide to show that. So long term, historically, growth wasn't the norm. We went through many, many hundreds of years with decline in growth, and then there was the medieval period, a sharp decline, and all of our economic assumptions were built in this little red period here. Growth was not the historical norm. So there is not a single body in the world, government or institutional body, that's forecasting an end of growth. This is the OECD baseline that shows that the size of the world economy is going to be triple in real inflation, not inflation, but in real inflation-adjusted terms by the year 2050. So the reality number 5, this chart shows, I should have showed this earlier, but other than the top 5% of Americans, every other category has less after inflation than they did in 2002. And yet, no matter what happens to actual growth, the IMF and the world forecasters, even after declining growth, they forecast growth's going to return. Okay, renewables can replace fossil fuels. Another blind spot. This would be a 3-hour talk on its own, so I'm just going to give you the bullet points. Many people assume we can seamlessly replace fossil fuels with low carbon tech without much underlying change to our consumption habits or social and political arrangements. New technology and renewable energy are possible due to this existing societal energy surplus. Fossil carbon underpins all mining, almost all mining, extraction, industrial processes needed for renewables. An oak tree or a chicken is renewable. A solar panel is not renewable, it's rebuildable. The problem of renewables is not the headline cost per kilowatt hour, but that they're a bad match for the demand-driven system our culture has built in the last 50 years. A significant switch to renewables will exaggerate the downward trajectory in economic output for advanced societies. No combination of fossil and renewable energy will maintain economic growth for much longer, given our credit and debt overhang. Renewable energy will face the same barriers in coming years and decades as fossil energy and many other sectors of society, a lack of funding. If we can't continue to grow, we have a date with a debt tsunami that will reduce the size of economies. 1/3 or more of societal energy uses would have to be set aside if we dedicate energy to invest in new energy to replace what we have now. Currently, scaling renewable energy globally is not replacing fossil fuels, but actually building a larger, hey, doggy. Yes. I bring my dog that looks very much like that dog to my classes, and my kids love it. 80% or so of USA energy use after conversions is non-electric. Most renewables are electric. So what can renewables, what can they do? We can have a vibrant and meaningful society using mostly renewable energy. A rough guess would be a quarter to a third of the current size. The combo renewable fossil fuel society might be 50% of today's size. Residentially, we'll have to do things when the wind blows and sun shines and not bake 2 turkeys at 3 a.m. if we have a craving to. We'll need to keep the fossil carbon industry going to maintain high-quality liquid fuels, pharmaceuticals, paints, petrochemicals, or turn the $100 trillion worth of built machines to electric. This won't be affordable to the masses. Longer-term, hydropower sites will be the place for heavy industrial activities globally. They're the only places with sufficient steady baseload power to justify factories. Solar will be the key driver of hot climate needs and midday peaks. Wind will provide the rest. We'll have excess overcapacity in wind and solar, producing 3 times demand at certain times and less than 10% at others. It's all a cost-benefit issue. We need to start now in either case, but with a systems view. My bottom line, my opinion after 2 decades of work on this, is renewables can replace fossil fuels to power a human civilization, just not this civilization. Blind spot number 7, what's happening is someone's fault. It's the tree huggers, it's Trump, it's the Chinese, it's the rich people. Well, no, it's mostly that fossil slaves have been asking for a pay raise. The cost of oil extraction is up 400% in the last 15 years. Blind spot number 8, the environment is a subset of the economy. It's taught in economics textbooks. Well, the reality is that there's not a single industry on the planet that would be profitable if all the environmental externalities were included in the price. The economy is fully a subset of the environment. Blind spot number 9, humans are the only people on Earth. There's 362,000 human babies born every day, which is almost twice as much as the entire non-human grade A population of 200,000. There are other cultures on Earth we're only beginning to understand. This is a bowhead whale. They live over 200 years up in the Arctic. And we know that because Eskimo killed one and found a spear point in it from the late 1700s. There's so many animals on this Earth that we don't even understand. Blind spot number 10, dollars are our ultimate societal goal. Well, dollars are really a proximate goal. We're really after status, social approval. We don't want to look poor or whatever. So we have substituted social and human capital for stuff, and in many cases, loneliness. So we talk about supernormal stimuli like Facebook. Dollars are the most unbelievable supernormal stimuli in our culture, because all the things in our ancestral past, the rich social tapestry of relationships and things in our groups of 20 or 50 people, have all been condensed into a dollar sign. And so it just super hijacks our brains into easily parsing things in our social system into dollars. So we end up spending so much of our time trying to keep up with the Joneses, and it's a trap. So I consult now and I teach. I make around $50,000 a year. I used to make $500,000 a year, and I blew it all, like on trips and parties and stuff. So I don't have much money left, not much in savings. I've never been happier in my life than now, because I'm surrounded by people that care about these very meaningful issues. I'm surrounded by students that nod their head and when they learn something. So I get paid in things other than dollars. I get paid in things that have meaning to me. The only time I kind of feel like a loser is when one of my former Wall Street buddies comes and is like, hey, just got back from Zambia. We went on a 3-week safari with the whole family. It was, and then I'm like, well, I could never afford that anymore. And I kind of feel bad. But as soon as they leave and I'm around my farmer friends and my student friends, it's very important who you surround yourself by, because then I feel great. Like when I talk to Ivan, I feel very good. Okay, so you've all probably seen tests like this, that as our wealth goes up, we get immense benefits to our well-being if we're very poor. But once we have around $60,000 salary per year, the benefits flatline. I used to manage money for billionaires, and the ones that had $200 million, all they wanted to do was get to 500 million. But 5 years later, when they had 500 million, their buddies had $1 billion and they wanted to get billion. It's not about the dollars, it's about the feelings they got every day. And they were no happier than the clerks that were processing the trades. So I've lived this. I know that it flatlines here. So the trick is to really get stuff for people that are down here, and this stuff is not necessarily benefiting society. So this is a complicated looking graph. Primary energy use on the bottom, percent very happy on the top. The Netherlands uses around the same amount of energy per capita as the United States. Is the same amount of happiness, and we use double the energy. The Philippines are slightly happier on average than Americans. We use 38 times the energy as the average Filipino. Now, if you all moved to the Philippines, you probably wouldn't be happy. But everyone there knows their situation, and they're surrounded by their family. They're all in the same situation. They're very happy. So it's this giant trap that we think we need more stuff to be happy. Blind spot number 11, humans are the result of progress, the crown of creation. The truth is that humans are social primates. We're not apart from animals. We are animals, and all that implies. Blind spot number 12, the U.S. Constitution is the right plan forever. This is the first time I've ever shown this slide, so we'll see how it goes. The truth is that there's been lots of social contracts in our ancestral past. The Code of Hammurabi 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. We had the Magna Carta. We had Syntagma in Greece. We had all kinds of documents that were agreements between humans at the time with what fit the social conditions. And now here we are 200 odd years later when everything has changed. We're impacting the biosphere. We have billions of people on the planet, and yet we're religiously following those rules. I'm not necessarily advocating to change that, but it's a blind spot that we think this document will last forever. Blind spot 13, we can accurately assess what the future will be by doing research, discussion with friends, watching TV, etc. But then we encounter all these biases, some of which I talked about: confirmation bias, time bias, consensus trance. And what ends up happening is people gravitate towards two poles. And the reason they gravitate towards two poles is there's no problem. Technology will solve it. I don't need to worry about this. We're going to figure it out. We always have. Or, oh my God, we're so screwed. There's nothing we can do. It's too late. So people go to those two camps. Why? Because it's cognitively more comfortable in those two camps, because it means you don't need to do anything. You don't need to do some uncomfortable change in your life. So the vast majority of people go to those two poles, and very few people are in the middle and say, let's be realistic about this story and start working on it. So how does this manifest? Well, imagine these aren't equal chance, but imagine there's 4 quadrants. This quadrant is the Star Trek future: growth and improving the environment. This one is growth, but kind of the Mordor future, where we're taking down mountaintops and tar sands. This one is not growth, a decline, but increased social capital, some speed bumps, but we kind of navigate our way through it. And this is Mad Max. This is like Armageddon scenario. Well, the way that our brains expose to these things is we, not only these things, but anything that has a high odds of perceived outcome and a low odds of perceived outcome, psychologists have shown that we overestimate those chances. So most people are looking at camps 1 and 4 when 2 and 3 are as much, and I would argue more likely, and yet no one's talking about that. So reality, we have a blind spot about our blind spots. The future is a probability distribution and is not yet certain, but it's likely different than most of us imagine. Conclusions, and I'll remind you, conclusions are before the what to do. So yeah, all right. Okay, so there's a pyramid, trophic pyramid in nature, also a trophic pyramid in human. We take natural resources, primary capital, turn them into secondary capital, stuff, and services, and we have some monetary, in the past gold or other things, marker for all that other capital. Well, today this pyramid is represented down here. It's a tiny little fraction of what current pyramid is. We've used half of the low entropy, high quality fuels and ores. We've turned it into a lot of goods and increasingly a lot of services. And we have this bloated financial representation of all that capital above it. We have the misshapen trophic pyramid. And this is kind of the story that's going to unfold in the next coming decades, is the extraction costs of high quality resources is going up. Exxon had to write down a huge amount of their reserves because they can't make money at $50 oil. At the same time, the affordability to consumers, when a lot of people are broke, they can afford less and less. So we've got this kind of wedge that's all centered around our fossil magic, and this how those things interact is a central point. So what does this mean for the coming decades? Is the super highly energy intensive activities are going to be prohibitive for many people and places. Things like aircraft or air travel or cement manufacture or things that use a lot of energy per unit of output that makes sense when energy is cheap, there's going to be problems with those. More intermediate or low energy tech is going to be the order of the day. So the other problem is we have this battle between doing what will help the economy and doing what's right for the environment. And we are alive during what I call the carbon pulse, which if you look at a 20,000 year view, this is what the carbon pulse looks like. That's when we mined the fossil sunlight. Now, we're somewhere between those two stars. Now, if I was only cared about the economy, I would hope we're at this lower star. If I only cared about climate change and the environment, I would hope that we're peaking this year and that it's going to decline. So it's kind of these like dueling incentives, but the only socially acceptable narrative is we can grow and have low carbon stuff. Because you now know why a little bit with our cognitive biases. We don't want to hear that other story. So I would argue that in the coming decades, America and the developed world is going to undergo what I call the great simplification, which is going to be more localization and regionalization, more poor people defined by stuff, not necessarily by meaning and happiness, simpler supply chains, and a few speed bumps along the road. So where I would argue that over time, and this pyramid, the second pyramid, could be higher for a while, but what the real story is we're moving from a time when the energy finding, energy extracting, and energy delivery of our energy was 5% of the economy, to a time when it's going to be approaching 15% of our economy. We're still going to have plenty of energy. It's going to be more complex and costlier. And so we're going to have a cultural conversation, I hope, about what goes in this surplus. What do we want to spend our surplus on? Disneyland and NASCAR? Maybe. 200-year solar panel? That would probably be better. So those are the type of conversations I think are valid. So this is a conceptual diagram. I don't know what the future is going to be. I'm pretty sure what it's not going to be. But this is just a conceptual example of the energy use and GDP for the last 40 years till today. We could go any of these possible routes. Here's another example about our well-being. There's alternative measures to GDP, something called the Genuine Progress Indicator, which peaked in the 1970s. Our well-being, on average, has been declining. Maybe it'll shoot back up in the future. Maybe it'll keep going down. There's lots of possibilities. What I would like to see happen is if we combine these two graphs of energy and well-being, is maybe shoot for this sort of scenario where we're using less energy but we're getting higher well-being from it. That would be something to aspire to. But if we have scenarios of increasing energy and GDP, flat economies and declining economies, 99% plus of the conversations going on with the leaders in our world are planning for this. We're not talking about these other things. Okay, summary. We do not face an energy shortage, but rather a long edge of our expectations of what we want to get our brain chemicals on. For most, not all people, growth is already over, and the same wealth or less will be the new reality. Current high consumption levels are being supported by central banks, creating money and guarantees around the world. Keeping credit spigot open is essential, otherwise we have a big stair step down. A carbon tax is a great idea that I'm for, but it will be a tax on 90% of our actual invisible workers and will reduce GDP. Solar and wind are getting cheaper, but not cheap enough to continue growth. Without growth, we have a reduction in complexity, size, and then significantly less benefits, deeper and wider poverty, and risk to social cohesion. We need much larger than baby steps, but our policies and institutions, and our brains maybe, were designed for baby steps. We're unlikely to do much in advance of a crisis, as evidenced by the 30 people in the room today, as large groups function with simple tropisms, while complex strategies are needed. The dog started wagging when I said that. I don't know why. The main differences between us and our ancestors is, number one, we're using fossil carbon, fossil productivity. And number two is we just now figured all this out. We have the science to tell us this whole story of who we are, how we got here, what we need, what we're doing, what are the opportunities and constraints. We have to own who we are, where we came from, to chart a different course, my opinion. Okay, what to do? I have some suggestions. I don't think there's any natural step. There's not a natural chess move that I could say, okay, all of you go and buy a solar panel or an electric car or vote for this guy. It's going to start with value change. And in my opinion, it's going to start with young people. And I've got some amazing stories with my students. But we kind of have to navigate with the way the chessboard is currently. So kind of a bizarro suggestion, which was bizarro because I had 2 cups of coffee this morning and I made this slide at 9:30, is have each town and locality set up an ad hoc Plan B team. Okay, so everything I've talked about so far, I'm 95% sure that I'm right. Okay, so I'm 100% sure that I got some of the details wrong because science is moving so fast. But I'm 95% sure that on the most shocking stuff, I'm largely right. The thing I know most about is the human brain and our cognitive biases. Therefore, I'm human, and I have to lop 30% off the top because I might be delusional about some of this and I am not aware of it. So from 95 to 65, 65% probability that my presentation is in the fairway. But even if you think it's a 5% chance, shouldn't we allocate some efforts in our communities, in our towns, in our families towards mitigating and preparing for this? Some suggestions. Try to relocalize supply chains. Instead of North Korea or South Korea and Japan to Rochester, maybe it's North Dakota and Ohio for some of the things that we really need. Poverty social safety nets. How are we going to deal with if we have 20 or 30% of people that don't have jobs or stuff? I mean, we need to think about that. Redirection of surplus towards essentials. We need rich people that have the societal surplus to help young people chart a different way. So somehow that conversation needs to happen in the cities around our country. Start local currencies. There are local currencies around. The Bristol pound in the UK, for example. And I think they've been kind of a failure, but I think the reason that I think they're good is if Rochester had its own local currency, I don't even know if you do, but what ends up happening is you get to know people more. It's a network to start the social capital of knowing your neighbors, knowing your farmers, knowing where things come from, and general what-if scenario planning. So America led the world in the 20th century, partially because we had all this access to stuff, and partially because we're kind of magnanimous and creative and outgoing compared to other cultures. The landscape has changed now, and I think we need to give up kind of the let's be great and focus on being good. And I think some of our values of kindness and empathy and sharing and helping people and sacrifice, and something that has been also with our culture for a long time, those things have been suppressed. And I think no matter what happens, we need to kind of have a gut check on without climate change, without resource depletion, who we are, what are our morals and ethics. And again, what do we want in this? And I think, again, what I was saying is we need to, for people to work on the issues that I'm working on, they don't help GDP by doing what I'm doing other than my salary. There's nothing that says, oh, there's a profit because you made something. What I'm talking about is making sure there's some future surplus for your children, your grandchildren, other species, maybe children that are alive 1,000 years from now. They're not going to have any fossil energy. So we need to support people that are working on these future surplus ideas. Okay, what to do as individuals. I give a list of 30 things to my students. I've condensed it quite a bit to be fast. So we've talked about 3 things. We've talked about energy and money and the economy. We've talked about climate change and biodiversity. And we've talked about human behavior. These are all interlinked things. So what I'm trying to talk about is the intersection of how those 3 things relate. So the first thing is to maybe see the world through new lenses. See the world through an environment, energy, and behavior lens instead of a monetary and media and Facebook lens. Number 2, it's okay to be sad about these things. It's okay to grieve. In fact, when I showed those graphs of the biomass that humans outweigh wild animals 50-1, I hope you all felt sad about that. I hope you were a little disgusted about that. That's a good reaction. You should feel that way. If you were like, who cares? That would really depress me. So if you did say, who cares, don't tell me after. But some grief is needed and normal. And the best way to grieve is, we're not getting a pony for Christmas, okay? So we're going to get something maybe nice, like a train set or a doll or some shoes or whatever. But the best way, I've been told by social psychologists, is not to keep all this stuff pent up, is to go talk to someone. Even if you don't find out the answers, the mere talking about these issues with some friends or some family or a group of people with like-minded interests, it reduces cortisol and stress hormones in the body, and it's helpful to just talk about these things. That's our ancestral environment, talking about issues. So try to change instead of reduce your expectations. We're headed for a world with less. I've learned over the last 15 years that doesn't sell. It may be true, but it doesn't sell. So we're headed for a different world. There are different possibilities. We have an influence on those possibilities. We're not getting a pony, but we're not getting a smaller pony either, but we might get something totally different, and we have a say in that. So obviously, not only corporations and nations need to move away from high energy intensive behaviors and lifestyles, but you as individuals do as well, because it'll give you more flexibility for what's coming in the next 20 years to be thrifty and not plan on some 200-mile commute or whatever it is. Take control of some of the things you can. Ivan, we doing all right? I got about 10 more minutes. Okay. Take control of some of the things you can. This was a famous study that had people, there was an experimenter turning the knob on the speed of colored lights going. And if blue, and then the student would hit the color after he did. And after a few minutes of that, they did a blood test of the person, and they interviewed them. They're like, ooh, that was really hard. I couldn't keep up. And the blood test actually showed cortisol and stress hormones, and it was a stressful thing. They redid the tests where the person itself changed the knob, and then blue, purple, yellow. And they actually turned the knob 20% higher, meaning it was going faster, and they were able to do it, and no cortisol in the bloodstream, and they were like, that was fun, can we do it again? And the point here is that we can't control things like war with North Korea or Russia. We can't control climate change, but we can control some of the things in our lives. And the more of those things that you control, even if it's a small handful, that gives you a better kind of stress response going forward. Reset your hedonic ratchet. So we have all these things that are going towards higher and higher neural rewards, and my ghost of dopamine past is very strong. But I would argue that if we can reset our, especially for young people that don't get hijacked into all this stuff, it gives you more flexibility to experience the world and kind of make the normal super instead of super normal. Go on internet, social media, and even electricity holidays, not to save energy, but to train your brain to have this sort of intermittence. Think for yourself. The consensus trance, we agree with what others, even if we're thinking something else. So how many things in our society right now are the equivalent of a bridge made out of chickens? 3 times the size of a global economy by 2050, global warming a socialist scam, manned bases on Mars by 2030. You know, some of these things are the equivalent of a chicken bridge, and we just go along with it without really thinking much. Choose your tribe. Who you hang around with is essential. None of us in this room were asked to be born during this era of humanity, which is incredibly amazing and also incredibly perilous. But it's who we surround ourselves by has a huge bearing on our happiness, on the meaning in our life, on our ability to cope. So we are very tribal beings. Make sure you pay attention. Don't hang around with people because they're famous or have a lot of money and they're assholes, because it'll make you miserable. The same thing is with our cognitive shift towards certainty, is when we hear about all this gloomy stuff, is, well, I got to get a gun and gold because there's economic chaos. And I think we need to kind of suppress that impulse and say, all right, if some of this starts to happen, what could I do in Rochester? What are my skills, physical or social, that could really help this community? And start thinking in that pro-social mindset. Use virtual world magic to influence others towards good. I gave the example of a school bus size Black Panther. You can use your own language to influence other people. It's one of the amazing powers that humans have with the way that our brains work. Enjoy absolute wealth rather than relative wealth. We spend so much time keeping up with the Joneses until we finally meet Jones and find out he's miserable. Instead of focusing on the 10 to 20% that we have less than our neighbor, maybe it's good to recognize that we have 5,000% more than the average human 200 years ago. And maybe we should compare who we are today with who we were yesterday morning, as one example. Make a decision to not always be stimulated or always comfortable, but to live a life of meaning. Our ancestral past, 5 to 10% of the time, they were really hungry, 90% of the time engaged and alive. Today, never wanting for food or stimulation, but 90% of the time, somewhat miserable. I mean, that's an anecdote, but somewhat valid. Consider reproducing other species rather than your own. There's 5,500 and declining mammal species on the planet. There's a lot of species in Minnesota, as my prior example showed, their habitats are declining. Does the world really need another human with my Sasquatch genes, or does the world need cultural children from these ideas? Or does the world really need to support some of these other species that no one is speaking towards? Everyone should adopt some species and divert some of your resources and time towards improving their chances. Playing chess on a chessboard by consensus fails almost every time. So we get back to this. Individuals and small groups have far more power to influence events than we assume. Small groups are going to change things. That's where the power is. You get 5 or 8 people together and you can really act on something. If there's 20 people or 100, it gets dumbed down towards the political expedience. And remember to be kind to yourself. Being effective is more important than being perfect. We hear about climate change, we hear about all this stuff, and I want to be vegetarian, and I want to drive an electric car, and I got to recycle, and there's so much that we end up going freaking crazy, because you can't be perfect, you can't do it all. It's better to be effective. Do the things you feel right about, and then try to make a difference on these other issues. So buying an electric car, or buying a solar panel, or having a garden, or boycotting the Keystone Pipeline, all these things are reactions to secondary mechanisms when the first conversation we should have is with ourselves. Before we decide to do all those things, what the heck does all this mean? I'm alive during this time. Who am I? Am I my urges? Am I my principles? Am I some combination? What do I want to do? Do I want to live a life of meaning? Do I just want to go with the flow and have fun? I can't answer those things for you. But a conversation about these things, you can't do it in 10 minutes. It might take a year, is something I recommend. So again, I don't know what to do about the future. I think there's a million possible things that need to be tried. I think 99% of those things are society looking one step ahead from where we are today. And we need to look 2 or 3 or 4 steps ahead. So I would argue we need to change the direction of the paths. We need to protect and prepare for a response to limits, which includes a lot of the things I talked about. And we need some small section of our population to own who we are towards a new culture amidst and beyond the bottlenecks of the 21st century. So these are some comments in emails I got from my students after my class. Amazingly, I have not become depressed by this information, but rather am enthralled by my new understanding of the role I can have in the world that we all live in. After this class, I'm committed to being an eco-Jedi or die trying, getting reality 201. The last few weeks of the semester, I've been the most consistently and profoundly happy I've ever been, while simultaneously being barraged with the most depressing possible information. Thank you. This changed my life. This class changed my life. I've been challenged and frustrated by the things we've talked about and read about this class. This has been one of the most important and valuable experiences in my life. The natural world as it exists right now does not have to be as fleeting as we're making it. My fear of cynicism be damned. I need to and will do something. So, some of you may get the inference that humans are bad actors. And if you think about all the things you do every day, it's kind of like that Costanza in the Seinfeld episode where he's like, I have a miserable life. I don't have a girlfriend. I don't have a job. What I'm going to do today is do the opposite. Do the opposite of everything that George would normally do. But I think to be that critical is doing us a disservice. Something amazing happened 12,000 years ago. We used to be egalitarian, we used to respect the environment, and we've been co-opted by this surplus, which has grown and accessed fossil fuels. But humans deep inside are these hunter-gatherer mentalities, which are very egalitarian, very empathetic, and care a lot about nature. So I think we need to give our species a chance. Kind of what happened the last 200 years, in my opinion, had to happen. It had to happen, so we had this wake-up call and have conversations of what it really means to be humans on this planet. What is our obligations? What is our potential? I don't think we know quite yet what hominids there might be in the future, what their knowledge, what their skills, what their culture will be. So I ultimately think that the stakes are very high. We've kind of are battling sapience in our minds against Goliath, the agenda of the gene. And I think now is a time of a call for superheroes. We need amazing people to step up. Maybe some young people will do amazing things with this information. This is my last slide. These are kind of the characters of the play that will be living this century. We do not live in normal times. The world is not yet fully broken. What is our species capable of? Please add to the steering for good. Thank you.